Welcome back. Today's panel discussion is looking at the future challenges of facing the sector in maintaining existing tunnel assets and how to expand lifespans while also improving reliability and reducing carbon. Joining me to talk more about the topic are Pam Rigby, who is Principal Geotechnical Engineer with United Utilities, Petra Salak, who is Managing Director of Israel of Dr. Sauer and Partners, and John Nicholas, who is Asset Manager. So welcome to you all and thank you for joining us. Sorry, I don't think I introduced John Nicholas, we had a slight technical issue there. John Nicholas, who is Asset Needs Manager for Tunnels and Highways England. So welcome to you all and thank you for bearing with us for this slight technical challenge there. The panel will be taking questions from the audience later on in this session, so please make sure you add those via the chat function as that conversation progresses. And if the question is for a specific person on the panel, don't forget to add their name too. So Pam and John, could you start us off by sharing with us details of your investment in tunnel renewals over the next 5 years? Pam, can we start with you?
Yeah, hi. I work for United Utilities and as part of the way that we fund our works, we do an asset management programme, which is a 5-year programme of works for AMP7, which we're currently in the first year. We have about £5.9 billion programme of works. I was having to think about this in terms of, in terms of tunnels. Our investment looks at water, wastewater improvements in reservoirs and re-sewage projects and the like. So it is, in terms of tunnels themselves, they don't typically, on our usual asset management programme, form part of our investment, if you like. So we do everything we can effectively not to build tunnels because tunnels are seen as particularly high risk. But obviously, as a consequence of populations, the places that we're putting this infrastructure and the drive to kind of go through our national parks, we're having to do more and more tunnels. So we try to avoid them rather than plan to do them. I don't know what your view is on that one, John.
Sure. For us in Highways England, we're just going into our Roads Investment Strategy 2, which takes us from 2020 to 2025, and we've managed to secure £27 billion worth of investment there for all of Highways England's estate. We have a couple of tunnels that at the moment are paper tunnels, as many of the people on the call will no doubt be aware, at Lower Thames, and the A303, as we all affectionately refer to it, I guess, in the press, as Stonehenge Tunnel. So those are our most significant investments. However, we've already got a number of tunnel assets across our estate. We have a number around the M25, which are on the Trans-European Road Network, and a number also on our strategic road network as well. So our investment in our existing estate, making sure that that it is fit for purpose, fit for our customers' purpose as well, and fit to lead us into the future, is something that we're now taking the opportunity to pause and review on, which is one of the reasons why I recently joined Highways England.
So Petra, you work internationally with a wide number of client organisations. Can you share with us what the plans are for those client organisations around the world? Are the plans outlined by Pam and John in the UK similar to elsewhere?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Yes, we do work internationally, and I have to say that from the perspective of renewable market, we see that basically because of the population on the planet is ever growing. Now we are around 8 billion people. It's just natural that there is a more and more demand for renewals and refurbishments. In terms of answering what Pam mentioned with John in terms of avoiding tunnels, I think that we just need to basically assess it by case and see where they are basically, fit for purpose. But I think that because we are getting more and more congested cities, or we want to basically protect the natural reserves and similar, there will be more and more tunneling projects because we are just running out of space on the surface. So this is just a natural cause, in my opinion.
So technology has played a major role in improving work on renewals, but let's take a moment to look at the challenges we've faced and what is still to come in that area. So how has the technology we're using for renewals evolved in the last 5 to 10 years, and what's that improved what we do? Anne?
Yeah, I said I sat and had a chat with some of our guys on this one to see what their view of the world was, really. We also had, a couple of years ago, we had a workshop of the great and good in tunnelling, and the question was posed of what would technology look like in the next 10 years? So what would we see coming forward? And to a man, everybody just stared at each other with the view that they weren't going to see much improvement or much change in tunnelling. And I think that the thought was around that, we've always been doing the same kind of thing. Tunnelling machines haven't changed much over time. And what we've seen is refinements. So I think what we saw was, in terms of technology, if you look at the actual mechanisms of tunnelling, was around investments in tunnel linings and manufactured have been seen. Improvements in liners, gasket designs have been constantly evolving, and we're seeing that we're being able to get to higher pressures, I think, with the drive to go deeper, wider, bigger. But again, and I don't know where the others think about this one, is design lives. We say that these design lives can last for 120 years. Obviously, we've not put them into practice. We can test them, but again, how are we going to be able to demonstrate that and move technology forward?
What in terms of renewals, though? So that was looking at new build. What in terms of renewal, what technology have you seen come through in that area?
So in terms of kind of maintenance, is that kind of what we're thinking? I said one of the areas that we're looking at is obviously in tunnels is the access, the need not to go into structures, and how we can monitor condition. So there's been, I think, in terms of technology, a lot of the things that we've been trialing and using have been 3D scanning. We've trialed that one to see how we can start to kind of do a bit of ground truthing of what the condition of assets are, sonar surveys. So a lot of kind of how we can get in 3D LiDAR modelling. We recently did an innovation lab with Telesco on this one to try and compare traditional CCTVs, which we use on more the smaller diameter tunnels rather than the large ones, against LiDAR methods. Photogrammetry is another one that we've been looking at. And one we were proposing to trial this year, but we never got around to it yet, is communications in tunnels is something that we find quite difficult as well. So mesh Wi-Fi was something that had been touted out there, but we haven't trialed that. I don't know what other people are seeing. John, Peter, on those areas?
John, you were nodding away there. You got some experience on that side of things.
I think we're all pretty well much coming at this from different angles, but we're all looking, with excitement at these emerging technologies and applications of them. When I was with Transport for London, we were looking at using drones as the vehicle for carrying cameras and basically using it for video.
I think John's dropped out there. Patrick, can we do? Sorry, John, I think we lost your internet just for a second.
That wouldn't be the first time. 2020 is doing everyone in, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's looking at drones, but he can't use his internet.
Bless. Me indeed. I was nodding away there, and I don't know whether or not you heard, but basically I think we're all looking at the same solutions, just coming at it from our own angles. There was a time when I was with Transport for London, last year, and we were investigating using UAVs, either drone-based or crawler-based, and basically looking at the same sort of problems that Pam was, which is keeping people out of dangerous spaces, so that we can gather reliable data, really good quality data, and use that as inputs into the design process, so that we can actually get out of it something that's usable. Whether that is using LiDAR, whether there are a number of different applications and different types of sensors that you can place on these vehicles. It's just trying to figure out what the right tool is for the job, so that you can get the right amount of information out of it. I think we're all at the stage now where we'd like to take people away from the problem, and it is one of those fundamental principles of in the UK in particular, confined space regulations, if you don't need to be in there, you shouldn't be. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking so closely at using drones for surveys, for inspections, and using that digital element for repeatability and being able to compare the results or the outcomes of one inspection against another one is, reliability and quality, I guess, is what we're looking at.
So Petra, are you seeing these trends taking place as well?
Yeah, I can just second what Pam and John said. I think that in last 5 to 10 years, what basically changes is the technology. It's the very extensive use of BIM, 3D scanning, drones, and so on. But I don't want to repeat what it was mentioned before. What I would like to say maybe is that what is interesting, if we are talking about the things like structural renewal, that didn't change that much in my opinion in last 5-10 years. I mean, we have some new technologies in terms of we are using CSA cement or some other cements which are basically more friendly to our environment, but also they have like a fast set, good strength, and also they have a good resistance against chemicals. But also maybe I could mention that we are more and more using steel fibers in the shotcrete. But overall, how we are like refurbishing the walls and the linings of our tunnels, that is changing quite slowly, in my opinion. Not so fast as the drones and lidar and things like that, which we are now using more and more, and that's definitely the future.
So what innovations do you think we'll see come through in the next 12 months? What do you think we're going to be talking about the great success stories at the Tunnelling Festival in 2021? Any ideas? Get your crystal balls out.
Well, exactly, and I think we're seeing. I think it's step changes rather than the wholesale changes. I think one of the seen is proactive rather than reactive tunnelling approaches, and it's just better monitoring during construction, monitoring of jacking pressures, grout takes, that kind of item. So we're actually modifying how we construct rather than reacting to situations that occur. One thing I would like to see, and if anybody could come up with an idea, that would be great, is, again, we do all these surveys and all that data. One of the things that we sometimes need is to core the tunnels to understand the lining thickness, the state of what we've got there already, so we can monitor going forward. So if anybody could come up with some easy way of doing that without having to go in the tunnel, that would be a great thing for 2021 for me.
That'd be great for our Tunnelling Awards in 2021 as well, so get inventing.
Yeah.
John, any thoughts?
Far too many. I think that's a problem with it. Is that I think it's one of those where you probably need to sit down with a cup of coffee and a big box of biscuits and just start talking through with people like Pam, yourself, and Peter, and just start figuring out where we need to be going. Back in the old days, we used to send a drill rig out. I remember being on CTRL quite a long time ago now, which probably dates me too. And stopping so that we could probe forward of the machine. With greater use, application, refinement, better data, software for analysing it, even potentially the increasing use of AI as well. It's something that we can reduce that risk, reduce the guessing factor, I guess, without having to, once again, as I said before, put people into a dangerous environment with moving parts and pieces and people in the same place.
So Petra, have you got a wish list of what you'd like the industry to come up with? Challenges to solve?
Wish list. The wish list would be to make our life easier, make sure that every worker on site is safe. So I would probably like to see more robotic use in tunneling. I mean, we are getting there. I think that we as an industry, even though I was saying that we as a tunnelers, we are maybe progressing a little bit slower than other industries. I think that that's something what we can work on. But on the other hand, we did quite a lot of progress in the last couple of years in terms of using more and more robotics. I also quite was impressed when I saw a newspaper now that Hyundai bought the company which is doing the jumping robots. I forget now the name. I think it doesn't matter. But I see that people are interested in robotic uses, and this is, in my opinion, future of tunneling. I would like to see these tunnels being done without basically people entering the open phase. In terms of tunnel boring machines, it's the same. I know that some people are now testing basically remote control of the TBMs. Guys sitting, for example, in Paris, driving the TBM in Hong Kong. So that's sort of things which I would like to see. Maybe what I would as well say, when we said what happened in last 12 months, I'm based in Israel, which is a startup nation, and I'm seeing, or I actually been contacted by a few companies which are doing artificial intelligence, and they are basically trying to look at how we are protecting our assets, bridges and tunnels, and they are really coming with some nice and good ideas. So I hope that the next 1 or 2 years, this will become like a normal thing that we will be using as a monitoring for assets, like really something smart what will make our life easier.
So it sounds interesting.
Sorry, Claire, I was just going to say, just to bring us back to what we were talking about earlier on. We had a little bit of a discussion in the green room, I guess we call it, where we all had a bit of a chinwag, and we were saying about the use of collaboration tools like Teams, effectively, which is what we're using at the moment to have a chat with you. And I see, having the opportunity to be able to thrash out these design issues and decisions earlier in the process of providing a tunnel, so that what we're actually doing is we're planning for renewals, we're planning for refurbishments as part of the preliminary design phase, rather than retrospectively in 25 to 30 years time thinking about how we're going to be ripping the kit out and replacing it with new kit. I mean, Blackwall northbound was open to traffic in 1897, so we're already in Here Be Dragons there, and that tunnel's operating. It was refurbished and reopened before the 2012 games, and it's cracking on quite nicely now. It has issues, and obviously it will need investment at some stage in the future. But we're already in that territory that you mentioned earlier on. We're beyond that 120 years life now. So from my perspective, I think that we should, as client bodies, as asset owners and asset managers, at the front end, start thinking that although our design for the structure will initially take us up to 120 years, the actual life of the structure will be beyond that, and we need to be thinking about those refurbishments of the kit that keep it safe for the people using it, and also how we keep the people safe that are going to be going in there in the future to take it down, so make life as easy as possible for them. And then that asset ends up being more available, which then means that that when you put people on diversionary routes or whatever it might be, whether they're trains or cars or whatever it's going to be, you don't have to do that as much, because your tunnel, your whole investment there is still available. So it's just trying to think, if you can do the hard thinking work up front, knowing that your asset's going to be there beyond what your initial design life is going to be, it will make things safer and more reliable, not only for the people that are working on it, but for the people that are in the wider community that could be affected by its opening or closure.
So we've touched on sort of quite a bit of information about the new technologies coming through. Do you think tunnelling engineers need new skills to be able to adapt to the greater use of technology? Do you think people coming into the industry now need different skills to perhaps the ones you had when you started out?
I think that is the case. I was reading something recently that was saying that there was a likely to be a major skill shortage in tunneling and the traditional kind of techniques. So maybe that would bring different people in with different experience rather than looking at the traditional how to build a tunnel. But I think there's a place for both. And I think we need to think about that going forward, of how you make it exciting and interesting to come into this kind of industry, and how you attract, those brains, which I'm sure we've already got now, but, how to bring the innovation rather than doing the traditional methods that we've always done. But then these things cost. and I'm not sure, maybe going forward the market for tunnels and the margins will improve, but do we have the margins there to actually invest in all of this technology and to drive it forward? That would be a challenge for me, really.
Yeah, it definitely is. It's a challenge. Petra, do you have anything to add on that?
Yes, I think that we all need to adapt all the time, and it's not just about the young engineers. It's also about us and even more experienced people. We all need to constantly, trying to catch up with the technology. So I think that this is common throughout the whole tunnel engineering profession. We are fast moving, from paper to PCs, then BIM, artificial intelligence. It's really fast, and we really need to adapt. One thing what I kind of noticed in the last couple of years is that this traditional split, for example, if I will be talking about the design and design offices, is that the distinction between the drafter and the engineer, with the BIM and so on, it's starting to blur out. And in my opinion, engineers will have to start basically like working more with BIM rather than relying on someone who we would call drafter. I think that there will be a lot of things which will change, and they are already changing. So yeah, I think definitely we need to all adapt all the time.
John?
We've talked a lot about the use of new technology, and I remember watching a program last year of someone operating a drill rig in Western Australia using an Xbox controller in front of a couple of flat screens in an air-conditioned office about 50 miles away. I'm not too sure I see tunneling going that way yet. I think we've been in a glorious position in the UK for a number of decades, where we've been fed by people from the mining industry which has obviously been drastically curtailed. Obviously, we've got the North Yorkshire potash works that are gearing up at the moment, with an awful large component of tunneling in those initial works too. But we're effectively winding down all of that. And if we're looking for skills from within the domestic market rather than going overseas, then I think investment within high schools and certainly within universities is something that we definitely need to ensure that we have those key sort of professional skills, but we also need to be thinking about developing the technical skills that sit alongside that. If you've got a person who doesn't know the importance of what their role is in ensuring that the tunnel is safe, then that's going to have a detrimental effect not only on the quality of the build, but potentially on the health or the safety of their colleagues and peers down there. And it's a little bit like that wonderful story about JFK visiting NASA and having a chat with the janitor with a broom, and him describing himself as helping put a man on the moon. Every single person who's on a tunneling job is providing a tunnel that's going to be used by millions of people potentially every single year, and we all play our part in that.
Okay. So you've touched on this already, John, about talking about design lives, but I'd like to come back to that. Now, greater technology brings more data that adds our knowledge, and that's allowing us to use tunnel assets for longer with greater certainty about deterioration. But I was wondering how that trend will develop. Are we using our tunnels for longer than they were designed for more frequently now?
I think
we will be looking. Sorry.
Yeah. Go on, John. Yeah.
Ladies first.
I said I was having a look at that because obviously we've got some Victorian assets that we're still using well out of whatever design life they were there for, and we'll keep using them until they fall to pieces. So one of the things that we've been looking at recently is doing an asset management review on some of our more critical tunnels. We do a similar approach at the moment on our reservoir embankment dams. So we prioritise them. We do risk assessments using an event tree approach. So what could happen, how it could progress, and how it could cause failure. And we've run those quite successfully, I think, on a couple of our main tunnels. Focusing on what the problems are, where we could go in and proactively maintain them. And that it's hopeful that we'll be able to target the problem tunnels and be able to use them for longer. But we are seeing them there. A lot of these are well out of their design life. And again, it's understanding how the liners are working, what we've got left, basically, because we don't have a lot of data. As-built drawings are not there, and sometimes we actually even don't know where they are spatially in the ground, which is always a challenge. So we need to improve that, but it's something that we're looking at going forward.
I guess that's the problem with older assets, they're all individual as well, aren't they? They're not built to the same design.
Yes, so that's exactly it. And one of the things, and I'll leave John to talk in a minute, but just picking up on the point around, I know, sorry, John, is said in terms of advances in technology and new tunnels and all of that, we've just got to remember that it's the ground investigation, and going back to my first love, ground investigation, which provides the data, and the technologies there have not advanced in many a year. So, think about that when you're building and maintaining your tunnels. Go on, John.
What challenges do you see, John, in terms of using our tunnels for longer?
I think we're going to be competing for the same ground, really. Yeah. Once again, going back to my time with Transport for London, we had a number of developments that were very, very close to our road tunnels, particularly around Blackwall Tunnel. But then there were also some utility assets such as Basildgate era sewers and that sort of thing, which effectively were built well beyond, that those are really, really old brick line tunnels and everything else, but they're standing up extremely well to the test of time. And, they're possibly, some could argue well beyond their service date, which is one of the reasons why we've got Tideway going in, I guess, to help take away some of the pressure of that. But as we are competing for both, above ground and below ground space, once again, it comes back to Pam and Peter too, making sure that we have the right good quality data about the ground, about the asset that we've got, about its condition, about how it's performing, and trying to look for ways of getting that data consistently, reliably, and in as good a quality as we can possibly use, I think is where the trick might lie.
So Petra, you've done a lot of work with Think Deep UK, and you're very much looking at planning assets in the underground in 3D and people being more engaged in looking at the future. What can you add in terms of if we're using tunnel assets for longer? What challenges does that bring in that environment?
I think that the challenge is that obviously sooner or later we will have to start refurbishing such a asset if it's basically longer there than we kind of anticipated or designed it for. What it means that you will have to stop the service, and it doesn't matter if it will be a water main or if it's a tunnel for cars. You need to stop it and you need to repair it, and that's the problem. It's the stoppages, because usually in our systems we don't have the redundancies. So that's basically the big problem. I think that when you are designing asset and the whole philosophy about design life, it's quite interesting, because I actually witnessed like two schools of thoughts. And the first one is, let's make it as lean as possible and as efficient as possible. So we are talking about thinner linings, less excavation and so on. And on the other hand, I witnessed that someone was asking me to make a space proofing in a tunnel, that there is already space for a third lining, which they are planning to put there in 100 or 200 years time. So, either you are doing it very, very efficient, and then you think maybe the technology will be so advanced in 15, 20 years that why I would be like, put all the effort and making it like, thicker and more robust, because maybe it will be changed in 50 years. And on the other hand, let's make it as big that I can put their third or fourth lining. It's both have some merit, and it's an interesting discussion to have.
So what implications does extending the service life have for inspection processes? Does it create more challenges?
think from my perspective, it's the challenge of cost, and I think Peter just picked on it a little bit there. We look short term, we spend short term, and that future looking, you know, what we can do 50, 60, whatever, 70 years down the line. I'm not sure we're in that space in terms of from a client organisation where we can look that far in advance, because everything's now rather than future looking. So I think that offers challenges, that we can't make assets robust. We're expecting them to be used for a lot longer period of time. So yeah, I find that's a really interesting point that you make, Peter, really, on that one.
Do you have the same challenges, John? Because obviously you have 5-year funding periods and things. Does that create challenges around inspecting using assets for longer?
I think it does a little bit. I think there's also a complication that people love a ribbon cutting ceremony as well. So you know, there's always that push pull between looking after your existing estate and bringing something new into operation too. And you know, there is a bit of a push pull between that as well, really. But you know, it does become part of this whole life sort of consideration that I think between Pam and Peter and myself that we've been talking about, which is thinking about the long-term use of whatever asset that we're designing and constructing and delivering, so that it actually it serves its purpose, you know, for the duration that it's designed for, with a little bit of wiggle room that we might be wanting to squeeze a bit more blood out of the stone. Yeah.
Petra, you're smiling away there. Do you see the funding challenges as well on the project you're working on?
I'm quite of a believer that whenever you have an economic crisis, the good idea is to invest in the infrastructure. And you know, it was in 1930s. It was after the credit crunch with Crossrail and some other projects. And I kind of see it also here in Israel. And I actually see that you know, if anything, that the demand and future plans are actually expanding. So I'm actually, from that perspective, quite positive. The infrastructure is a key. People do understand it, and the demand is there.
So, John, you already mentioned earlier about the wiggle room on top of the 120-year design life. Do you think the leaner design being applied on current projects now will impact on future engineers' ability to extend service life, as we're doing now on older assets?
Yes, it will do. Whether that's positive or negatively impact, I think will be seen in the fullness of time. I think one of the principles really, well, lean really is applied to remove, you know, one of its key things is removal of waste and inefficiency and that sort of thing. So long as scope isn't trimmed back on, affecting what the eventual outcome or the serviceability of the asset is, then I don't see that as being a negative thing. But I do see that, you know, by trimming back on certain items that some people might consider as luxuries, like Peter mentioned, that one particular case of allowing for additional space for further linings in the future, you know, a lean approach would probably not make that design decision, whereas a slightly different philosophy would most certainly be the one that was applied in that case. So yeah, I guess it really is. It depends on you know what the actual need and requirement is of that asset that's being constructed and delivered. If you want it to live for 120 years without any issue, then I guess you'll probably end up getting well in excess of that 120 years. But if it's only going to be there for 120 years, then yeah, it'll start looking tatty from around about 80 years of age, I'd imagine, and then be limped through the last third of its life, if you like.
So that's for the Tunnelling Festival 2100 rather than 2020.
Exactly.
Pam, have you got any thoughts on that?
I was saying, I think that then, you know, when you put a new asset in and have those discussions about how lean or how much redundancy you put in, I think you need to also look at when your planned inspections are going to be, how long between your maintenance, and that will form part of that whole life view on your tunnel, really. So obviously, if you put more redundancy in, then it may be longer time before you have to go in to maintain and inspect. So again, there's a balance there, I think, of understanding what the whole life cost of these tunnels are and weighing those against each other.
Petra, do you see clients struggling with getting that balance between gaps between inspection and actually investing in the initial tunnel construction?
That's quite a tricky question. I think that somewhere between, I guess, it's the answer. Some clients have, you know, quite a strong opinion what they know, and some less, and they are more willing to have a discussion. So I think it varies quite a bit, but it's a tricky to strike the balance between these two.
So now we'll move on to the topic that's been dominating every conversation around future projects, carbon net zero, and how do we get there? How has the drive to carbon net zero changed your approach to renewal and refurbishment? Or has it not yet?
I would say it is a driver, and that's the aspiration, and obviously there's net gains come in and carbon neutral and all these, but I think it's the challenges around how to make that happen and what that looks like. And you can do the small wins, but I'm not sure what others think about how we're getting there from tunnels perspective of achieving that when you're making concrete tunnels, which obviously is not a sustainable material. How are we driving carbon neutral?
Do you want anything to add? You're frowning there.
Yeah, I haven't got the answers.
Yeah, I do think that it really is a difficult sort of question to give you a short and concise sort of answer to, because there are so many inputs, you know, to this whole sort of carbon and carbon dioxide sort of question. You know, whether it comes down to choice of materials, I think we were talking earlier on about types of concrete that emit less carbon dioxide as part of the curing process. That it could be things such as travel plans, so that you get your workers to and from site in a similar sort of way to the way that Crossrail planned it, where you know they would bus people in and you know sort of use that semi mass transit sort of an approach, to considering over the life of the asset, keeping it as available as possible, which again ties into what Pam was talking about, your inspection and effectively your design philosophy for the operation of the tunnel too. If you can keep it as available as possible, you're not putting people on slower diversion routes, putting them out of their way, you're keeping them on the strategic path, whether that's road, railways or you know utility pipelines. You will be causing less harm, which I guess would have a lessening on the emission side of things, whether you know whatever that substance might be.
So obviously we're seeing quite a bit of environmental challenge with new build tunnels at the moment. Do you think the focus on reducing emissions of greenhouse gases will create a trend for more renewal in the tunnelling sector rather than new build in the long term?
I think we're going to have to go that route. I said we're looking at putting a brand new tunnel kind of through areas of outstanding beauty, and you know the challenges that we find for new builds because of all the environmental impacts and the costs and all of that. It's finding it really difficult. So we are looking at ways that we can optimize and keep, like you said, sweating the assets, rather than do new build. New build is very much our last line of defence, rather than our first go-to answer, really.
I think that the big question is like, you know, what project we are talking about and what that project will bring. If we will be talking about, for example, a railway tunnel or a highway tunnel, which will actually allow, you know, traveling more efficiently, basically then putting people into trains out of the car, that itself obviously will make the environment better and less of CO2. Obviously, we all know that the cement is ranked 13th cause of human-made carbon dioxide emission worldwide. Also, I think that we should not be unfair to the concrete and cement. We also need to say that there is no other material in the world which is produced in higher amounts than concrete. So let's be also fair to concrete and cement, in my opinion. But I think that nowadays, it's so. To structure what I'm saying is that I think that it depends on the demand. So, if there is a demand and we want to do a new high-speed rail line, I think that it's absolutely, justifiable, and we should go and do the new tunnels and new lines. That would be my opinion. Second thing is that when we are building the assets in terms of reducing the carbon, it's also a question of how much the client is ready to spend, because we all know that the LC3 cement, in comparison to the Portland cement, the CO2 emission is about 30% less, but also the price is like 30 or 40% higher. So, does the client has the appetite to pay for it? That's also important to ask them.
Let's ask the client, John. Put you on the spot.
Nothing like being put on the spot, is there? Do you know, it's one of those where I was thinking as you both, or three of you were talking there, when I came into tunneling, I went to a mining college and I had to try and square that mental circle in my head, because I was all geared up towards mining, which is all about winning the material out of the ground, and I ended up figuring out that that tunneling is actually inverse mining effectively, because when you're a miner, what you dig out of the ground is worth the money, whereas when you're a tunneler, the hole that you're left with is actually where the value is. And I've always maintained that perspective that, we need to get as much value out of that hole that we put in the ground, and in any way, shape or form that we can. And whether, our future needs mean or dictate that we end up enlarging it in some way, shape or form that could be innovative. I don't really mind. It's just trying to figure out what the best use, the most cost-effective use of that space is going to be going into the future. And as Peter said, there could very well be those scenarios where you have to blaze a trail and put in those new links to make the movement of people, materials around the world more effective and more reliable. And tunnels could very well be that solution. But once again, it comes into, from my side of things, thinking about it in a more holistic point of view, which is, we want to have that asset there for as long as possible, and get as much value out of that hole in the ground.
So just coming back to the renewal sector, are there gaps in the terms of technology and solutions to deliver a low carbon future for the asset renewal sector? Again, what's your wish list?
Go on, Peter, you can have a wish list first this time.
I mean, where are the gaps between the technology and the current situation in renewables? I think that I would go back to what I said before in terms of the structural renewal of the tunnel lining. That's nothing new, and we are not that innovative, to be honest. What is innovative is maybe the chemicals which we can use to grout, for example, or for example to make our tunnels watertight. So that changed quite a lot and is evolving quite quickly. So that's good, and probably it can be even more, because usually the clients, and that could be a question to Pam and John, is that clients will usually tell you we are looking for innovation, so bring me some new products, but then they will tell you when it was used before, and after you answer that, then they will ask you when it was used on my asset or in my town before. So sorry.
Is that the challenges people face with trying to use low carbon technologies? The fact it hasn't been used before, and in the tunnelling environment, you want something will work. Is that a challenge for the industry?
I think so, and I think we're looking for. I mean, we throw, and as Peter was saying, we throw that challenge out. We want to see what's happening in the world, in the market, what's coming forward, and then when we're given that, we kind of say, oh, but it's not tested, it's not trialed. We want the certainty. So I understand the challenge that you give us there, Peter. I think one thing we threw out was water tightness, exactly as you were saying. We wanted a tunnel that was absolutely 100% watertight, and people were coming up with ideas and thoughts on how this could be done. But again, it wasn't trialed, it wasn't tested. So we want something that's there, useful, cheap, will give us the full life that we want, will give us redundancy. We want the world, and I'm not sure it's there, and we do little steps on it. I think one thing someone said to me was right first time. I think that's maybe where we're going with kind of the future, is make sure, we use the use of digital assurance, check in as we go, so we put the things in right the first time, so everything's as best as it can be. Maybe that's where we'll go to. But yeah, we want the world, we want innovation, but we're not probably prepared to pay for it.
We just have one question coming from the audience, which we've just got time for before we finish. So some areas of automation in tunnelling have been mentioned, but do the panel think there's an opportunity to automate in areas that we're not currently?
Trying to think of some. Go on.
I might think about few things. I mean, and I'm not expert in asset protection and renewables, because I'm not like asset owner. But I think that the automatization and basically using of robots, that's really like absolutely everything. Like when we are talking about cleaning the tunnel, when we are talking about repainting the tunnel, all these things can be done with robots without using people to do that. And so yeah, I definitely think that the automatization can be increased, and not just the mining and the tunneling, but also then the maintenance and repairs and so on. To go somewhere, drill a hole with the packer, and then put the grout. That actually can be done by a robot, in my opinion. I'm not sure if like now, like tomorrow, but in a couple of years for sure. I mean, some companies, what they are doing, it's absolutely mind-blowing in my opinion, what the robots can do.
Just briefly,
I mean, one of the things we looked at was putting, what could we install in a tunnel? What could we actually have there that proactively kept giving information rather than going in every so often? But what we found with the challenges of power, getting that communications back, and we've already said it's a hostile environment, so that was one of the areas that we looked at. Could you put something in that would permanently monitor? And I'm not sure we came to a conclusion that you could.
Okay, I think that's just about all we've got time for today. So there's some really fascinating discussions there, some real challenges to be addressed, and lots of opportunities for entries into the Tunnelling Awards for next year, I think, for people to innovate on. So thank you all for joining us today. We're going to be taking a short networking break now, but NCE's features editor Nadeed Badu will be back at 11 to chair our project case study session with a look at 2 international projects. During the break, you can network with our sponsors and other delegates, as well as view the additional on-demand content from our sponsor Atkins, looking at fire safety and the work on the Humber gas tunnel. See you back here shortly.